Hi everyone, welcome to Identi3. It's a podcast all about Web3 and digital identity. My name is Nick Lambert, I'm the CEO of Doc, and today it is my pleasure to be joined by Sarah Clark. Sarah is the Senior Vice President of Digital Identity at Mastercard. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, it's a pleasure to be here.
So what I always do before we have guests on, Sarah, is kind of have a look through their LinkedIn to give people listening in a flavour for what they've been doing and where they've been. So you've been at Mastercard for almost 3 years now. And really before that, you've always held, it seems, senior positions within the kind of identity space with several organisations. The two that came up is Endemia and Mitek Systems. Mm-hmm. But you also had senior product roles for an e-commerce startup called Tilster and also a payment processor, Incom. So it almost seems like there's that kind of identity, but also the kind of payment link with that as well. And I'm guessing that's also why Mastercard wanted you onto their team, that kind of wealth of experience there. Interestingly, I noted that quite early in your career, or almost at the start, you actually started out as a software developer and an architect for 3 years. And I actually wondered, like when I was reading through that, Sarah, I kind of wondered, is that, what made you move away? Was that by design that you decided, actually, I prefer the business orientated, more technical product roles than development? Or was that something that just kind of happened to you?
Well, I actually started my career as an actuary because I have a math degree. And I worked at a consulting firm. It was called Watson Wyatt Worldwide at the time. And the actuary career path wasn't a good fit for me as a person. It's a great career path. But I saw the software developers and they just seemed like they were working on really cool stuff. So they allowed me to move into the development department. So I guess I kind of fell into software development. I learned a lot. I enjoyed it. I'm sort of a logical thinker, naturally, I guess. I mean, you kind of have to be if you hold a math degree.
Yeah, of course.
But I found that I was always interested in talking about the vision and sort of that side of things. So I did development for a number of years. It's great experience to understand the process. And I mean, things have changed so much. I was using Visual C++, right? I don't even know if that exists anymore, but it gives you really great insight into how that all works. But I did intentionally move into more product-oriented roles because that's just a better fit for my strengths personally. But you're exactly right. I've been in identity for about a decade. I've had the opportunity to lead a business from the ground up at Mitek in identity with identity verification using documents and biometrics and all of that. And through doing that for a number of years, I just got to know the industry more at large. And I was really interested in gaining more hands-on experience in other aspects of digital identity. So after about 5 years, great run at Mitek, we expanded globally. I mean, it was really exciting and interesting stuff. I stepped away, opened my own consultancy, got the opportunity to work with a number of companies in the space, big banks, kind of seeing how they were thinking about identity and leveraging their KYC assets more broadly in that space. So got to work on some bank ID type projects, among other things. Spent some time at Endemia, which is great because they are, really powering a lot of government initiatives. COVID basically hit when I was leaving Endemia. I thought, I'm going to probably take more time off than I thought I would, which was actually great. I did a lot of things during that time, but got a call from Mastercard. Mastercard was looking for somebody to lead their reusable, globally interoperable digital ID network initiative. And I was like, this is just a perfect fit for what I want to do because I do believe reusable digital ID, verifiable credentials, all the stuff that's been forming for many years. I do believe that it's kind of coming to a head and becoming real in market. So I was very excited to have the opportunity to lead a major initiative in that space. So that's what I've been doing for the past 3 years, and happy to talk more about that. And, I definitely want to share kind of my personal opinions, not just, kind of the Mastercard opinion on the space. So excited to talk more with you today.
Yeah, fantastic. We can actually pick up there then on the Mastercard side, because I think that Mastercard talk about a privacy preserving, global, interoperable, reusable ID network. And historically, you wouldn't often think of large enterprises being particularly interested in the privacy preserving aspect. Many of them have historically lived off of the data and the knowledge of what their customers are doing. And so It seems like a real shift for a very large, probably quite traditional, I would think, business, and please tell me if I'm wrong, actually moving into really wanting to preserve the privacy of their users. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Sarah.
Yeah, so MasterCard's a big company, so I don't claim to know every aspect of MasterCard. I think that's near impossible. But as a general guiding principle, beyond identity and the payment space, MasterCard is very stringent about data privacy in a good way. Collecting data, attaching that to people, that is just not part of what MasterCard does at all. So we have a very, established, very careful privacy group. So that was actually really nice to see when I joined MasterCard, because kind of from the outside, you're never quite sure. But the culture is really centered around data privacy kind of as a whole. But when it comes to identity, yeah, you're exactly right. The vision and the execution is all about the very simple principle that the paradigm is shifting. Individuals will own their own digital identity, will share only what's needed, and that will be done using a framework that puts your data privacy at the center of things. And, I think it's, great that MasterCard holds that principle, and we really do execute according to it. We're very, very careful about that. But it's also a match at what is happening globally, right? Data privacy laws continue to escalate. We see that certainly here in the States, and that's the same globally. So I would say beyond the walls of MasterCard, this concept of a privacy preserving, reusable digital ID, that is where the market's going, in my view.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. And for those who are not familiar, Sarah, maybe you could talk about first, my follow-up question would be why do we need that reusable digital ID? But also, if you could even explain what even a reusable digital ID is for those who are maybe not familiar.
Yeah, sure. The concept is very simple, and sometimes folks don't kind of understand why MasterCard is in this business, but if you think about it, it's really analogous to payments. You own your own digital ID. Your ID credentials are stored in some sort of an identity wallet, digital identity wallet, of course, that you carry with you, and you share those credentials as needed to conduct your business. So the reusable concept is really just all about the fact that you are carrying a digital ID that is known to be valid in some way, and you can reuse it wherever needed, and it should be easy for you. So that's really the concept. Why we need it? There's a bunch of reasons. Reason number one that I've been really focused on, and my team's been really focused on, is to make things much easier and much more secure. So if you kind of look at what are the use cases that I mean when I refer to that, one, of course, is opening a bank account, right? But that's something you don't do very often. There are issues, I would say, with that process. It could be made easier, but probably not the best example because how often do people open bank accounts? But eKYC is certainly a use case for a reusable digital ID. But what I mean more is age verification. The regulations globally, and I would say the need, right, is to protect certain content, certain purchases, so that only people that are of a certain age can do that. You don't want to scan your driver's license at every site you might be going to. That's not a great user experience, and you're oversharing. What is needed is something where you can securely share I am of age through your reusable ID so that it's really, really simple and it's preserving your data privacy and it's enabling more digital use cases to be accessed securely and so that it's really, really easy for individuals. So we're working on like a lot of those high frequency use cases, and I would say that's a major driver for reusable ID. And then the benefit to the ecosystem at large is it also makes these less frequent use cases much, much easier as well. So rising tides kind of lift all boats, and that's really how I see, the market at large.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. We actually had a really interesting use case with CEO of Merit Protocol, Alex Lyashok, on the previous episode, and he was talking about a pocket of probably about 20 million or so Americans who need to access loans frequently, maybe 8 to 10 times per year, small amounts like maybe $500 to $1,000, really just to make ends meet. And that's another fantastic use case because it allows them to access financial products much more cheaply and with much less friction than they would today. So that's another really nice kind of relatively high volume use for reusable KYC.
Yeah, I love that. And, I guess other aspects of it are, the friction's up front, right? And we can talk more about kind of digital driver's licenses and how that's really changing the game. But, kind of in addition to what you're mentioning, the other use case is just simply logging in or a step up or, it's not always about signing up, to your point. It's about re-authenticating in a way that's secure and easy. And the other thing that I would point to is, the current ecosystem, the tapestry of identity verification processes that are used, in different ways by different companies. There's a lot of fragmentation, and fragmentation offers, opportunities for fraud to flow in. Yeah. So one of the simplest examples might be the way that identity is verified during sign-up could leave kind of a gap between that and ongoing authentication. And you don't want that. You want the process to be seamless, ideally using biometrics, not, knowledge points, closing gaps for SIM swap fraud. So there's so many ways we could take this conversation, but in simple terms, a reusable ID can solve for all of that fragmentation that's happening, that's leading to continued increases, egregious increases in identity fraud. That's another huge problem globally, and it continues to rise.
Yeah, excellent. And you mentioned some of them before, like you talked about biometrics and things. What are you seeing is, again, at quite a high level, because I know it feels like you could go way down to the depths very quickly, Sarah, and you're almost kind of straining to do that, which is great. But what are the kind of essential ingredients, do you think, to make like reusable KYC, for example, happen? What are the different types of components or tools that we need as a collective to enable all this?
Well, so you need an identity wallet. And, I know we're probably going to talk more about verifiable credentials, but the fact that these standards are becoming standards, I guess, that's great because it creates a way to, inject, to verify, the different credentials that somebody might hold in an identity wallet. So there's that side of things, but With respect to other technologies, because it's a reusable ID infrastructure, part of the vision needs to be that it has to be extremely secure. So we're looking at a kind of stack of technologies that roll in kind of a bunch of stuff to make sure that every interaction is secured to the highest level. So you mentioned biometrics. Behavioral biometrics, both when you're onboarding into your reusable ID to look for, bots and device reputation and other signals. That's part of it. Active biometrics. So, the strongest possible liveness detection, and then making it really, really easy to use a physical or active biometric when somebody is unlocking their reusable ID and choosing to share one of the credentials that's in it. So those are some examples of what we have. And again, we use a stack of a variety of signals and kind of the risk-based approach that is standard within KYC. All of that's kind of put into the reusable ID ecosystem, as I think it should be, to make it very, very secure. So there are, some opinions about biometrics, whether they're, safe or good to use. And there's, always advocates that are saying something about the overall privacy of biometrics. My opinion is that biometrics have reached a point where they are very, very easy to use. Mobile devices have incredible penetration rates globally that continues to grow. People unlock their devices more and more often with biometrics. And if you have biometrics combined with liveness, that's an extremely good way to get rid of a lot of the fraud that comes with passwords and sort of other things that are less secure. So using physical biometrics is definitely part of how we've implemented reusable ID and how I would advocate it should be implemented overall.
And the privacy issues you talk about with biometric, I guess that's related to people having a concern if when they have their biometrics stored with a provider, what is that provider doing with those biometrics, I guess, is the concern, isn't it?
It is. And kind of going up a level, one of the things that makes our field so interesting and, exciting in a way is, these concerns are valid, right? I certainly don't want to create an ecosystem of the future where people are being tracked and that can be weaponized or what have you. And that, those possibilities certainly exist when you look at digital identity and kind of in whose hands are different elements. But there's been a lot of maturity to the technology, to ways to store things so that they're no longer, a biometric that can be used in the wrong hand per se. So, a responsible use of those types of technologies is really, really important. I think that's part of what makes this industry really exciting, is kind of how to do this right, because the benefits could be so great to have a global, shift to individually owned reusable digital IDs. But all of us as leaders in the space really need to keep a close eye on the ball to make sure that we're developing platforms that have the best interests of individuals always at the center.
Yeah, and I think that's where the standards certainly, it's not the be all and end all, but that certainly is a good guide for us all as well. That those standards have been developed by a lot of very smart people, well-intentioned people over a long period of time. And people get frustrated by how long standards can take, but that's in part a good thing because it really means everything's well thought through. And when we start to build with these standards, it means that we're doing it in a really considered way, which I think is really important. Yes,
yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Do you see? So Mastercard certainly one of the more forward. Like we kind of do as best we can to kind of see like who all the kind of players are in the space as a provider into the space, and it certainly seems like in the financial side, Mastercard certainly seem pretty far ahead of the game, I would say. Do you see this is a real strong, I guess, business differentiator between that and maybe some of your competitors, like offering this type of service and being fast to the market with it?
I would say that, I mean, the answer is yes. I would say that identity at large is a differentiator for Mastercard. So what my team has been doing with building a new network for Mastercard, a globally interoperable, privacy-preserving digital ID network. Just to be very, very clear, that is a new network for Mastercard. We have our own trust mark in market, so you wouldn't see the circles to use your reusable digital ID. You see an ID brand. So it really is a new network that is, related to the payment network in terms of the expertise it takes to stand up a global network, but it's unrelated in the eyes of individuals globally. They get a reusable digital ID. They use it where they see the ID trust mark. But identity is a big focus at Mastercard, and it's not just about the reusable digital ID network. It's also about the various signals that can be injected into checkout flows, into payment flows, into onboarding to an issuer of credit card flows. So certainly at large, being able to secure all of that through identity risk signals and other things, that's a huge differentiator. It keeps the network secure. It keeps the individuals transacting on payments secure. So yes, as a field, it's a big focus for Mastercard. And certainly there's a lot of interest in what my team is doing when it comes to eKYC and other things. But it's a new network. And many of the use cases that we've been working on are just completely different, I guess, use cases than the traditional Mastercard business. So helping universities, as an example, is something that we're focused on that really doesn't, overlap that much with the main focus of Mastercard's core business. And I can talk more about what those use cases are if you want.
I was actually going to come on to that, and it's a good cue to do that. I mean, what are some of the more kind of useful projects that you've been involved in? Because I think when we were chatting kind of just before, we had this session, Sarah, and we're talking about different things that we could explore, it became evident to me that the scope that both you and Mastercard were thinking about using this technology, it did seem, there were obviously some obvious links to what I would determine to be your business. Then, of course, there were a lot of things, like you said, like universities that seemed pretty abstract. So, yeah, it'd be great to understand more about some of the maybe more interesting or more left field projects that you've been involved in.
Yeah, so I mentioned age verification as being, one of the global drivers. We're certainly involved in projects related to that. And there's really two sides to just the age stuff. There's restricting access to, certain goods like liquor sales. We're working with online liquor retailers as an example, as well as content, online at large. And a lot of the social media regulation that's passing in the US, I find that to be very, very interesting, and that will be a big driver. But some of the other use cases, I mentioned university. Having a digital identity in order to conduct your life at a university is something that we've been working on in Brazil. So onboarding and logging into the student portal, using your digital identity to check in at class or for certain exams. So one example that I think is really interesting is people in medical school. They need to be present and sit for certain, exams that are hands-on, tests of their, say, surgery skills. None of us want our doctor to not have actually been present for those types of tests. Because, of course, that's critical for them to know what they're doing when they're operating on you. And there is fraud with that type of thing. And that's not just true in Brazil. That's true globally. I read some crazy stats from Canada about people faking like advanced, I don't know, PhDs or advanced degrees. So it happens everywhere. So checking in and knowing that you are actually present at certain really key exams in the university experience, checking out, technology or equipment or books. So there's a whole bunch of things where you can use your digital ID, whether it's digitally or in person. And I think that's one of the great aspects of a well-formed reusable ID overall platform is it's not just about using your digital ID digitally, it's also about being able to use it in person. So kind of crossing those, channels is something that we also see as a need, doing that seamlessly, and university life is a great example of that. Going to the Web3 topic, and kind of maybe vastly different than university life, definitely seeing, emerging businesses when it comes to using NFTs for a variety of things. And that's something that we've been active on. NFTs for music, so musicians get royalties and the identity can be used as part of those interactions. So I find those use cases to be very interesting as well. So let me just stop there before I ramble on too long. There's a lot of, if you think about it, where digital identity is needed is kind of everywhere. It could clean up a lot. And I find the whole Web3 digital ID, progress that's happening globally to be really exciting. And, I think it's re-envisioning the way the internet works. And in my view, that's needed. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, if we kind of almost get all the way into DeFi as well, which is a kind of big part of decentralized finance, I think that, that's an area that's obviously going to be regulated. I think that we've found companies that we've worked with or been just talking about in the space have either been kind of doing the ostrich thing of sticking their head in the sand and saying it'll never happen, but they always find a way, regulators. And so potentially, again, using, verifiable credentials in that type of environment potentially can work really well. And I think if that industry is quite forward about being involved in the how that compliance is applied, they can really help guide it as well and not have something kind of forced down upon them. I think as well, talking about universities, Sarah, one of the we've been involved in discussions with the European blockchain infrastructure, the EBSI group, and they're doing a lot of work now with universities where the universities are potentially pooling. So there's little alliances forming between multiple universities across different countries in Europe, and they're trying to find ways of having some kind of identifier issued by one and being able to be understood by all of them. So I think the work that you guys are seeing is also in Brazil is also kind of happening at quite a large scale level within Europe as well at the EU Commission, which is good to see.
Yeah. And, I guess it goes both ways, right? Because, I'm Sarah and I'm showing up at maybe different universities and that can all interoperate. But the other way is, of course, the universities can provide me with a verifiable credential to show that I've reached a certification level, a degree level. I've taken, whatever it is, accreditations. So when you start to get into that view of the future where I can carry, my university credential with me, and then maybe I can use that in addition to my base identity that maybe is verified through a government issuer. If I have my base identity and then my university credential and I want to get a loan that's targeted to, students or recent grads, boom, done. I don't need to go through a bunch of fill out this form and we'll verify with this. The use cases that it makes more accessible, easy, and secure are really exciting. We haven't quite gotten to that spot at Mastercard. We've been really focused on the kind of base identity that's verified by a government issuer. So it's really about, folks that are citizens. My group hasn't been working on the inclusion angle yet either. But, the vision is that multi-credential environment, kind of just like you said, that operates across borders and is a two-way street, especially when it comes to like a university or an employer, stuff like that.
And I guess as well, I mean, like you're saying, we're not there yet. And I think like the whole industry really isn't there yet. And I think it's still like the industry is still quite, obsessed with trying to tell everyone how it works, and it should be decentralized or should have a blockchain. And the reality is probably, that you've actually made it when people are unaware that it's even there, and it's working behind the scenes, and it's totally seamless. That's when you get the mass adoption, and that's when you've actually built something that's super useful and is mature enough to be used. I
totally agree. And there's a lot of jargon, and it can be quite confusing to people that aren't immersed in the space. Yeah. And I mean, that's my personal passion, is taking things that are complex and, making them really, really, really simple. And that, there's a tremendous effort to create awareness and to, like you said, just make it into a utility that's both valuable, seamless, and, you use it, but you're not really aware of why it works. It's just kind of magic, right, to the average person. But it's exciting to see players like Apple also experimenting in the space, just to kind of, I guess, pivot a bit to maybe my own question that I'll ask myself, right, which is about digital credentials and mobile driver's licenses and all of that. I think that's a huge driver. Very exciting to see governments investing. I think there's like 40 governments that are actively investing in digital ID initiatives. Those look different depending on where you're at globally. Some countries embrace the concept of a government sort of running the program. I happen to be wearing a SingPass shirt. They're an example of, a place that's very advanced on that front. Other places not so excited about that concept. And that's like the UK and, the US, where there's kind of fear of a government centralized approach. But, even in these markets, you see mobile driver's licenses, digital driver's licenses, the ability for a certified provider to do a biometric check to the issuing source. So there's a lot of activity, and that's going to be a huge driver for reusable ID, because that's really what a mobile driver's license is. And seeing players like Apple move forward with allowing those to be in the wallet and to be used for certain use cases, I think that's really great, and that helps introduce, the concept to people in a pretty simple way.
Yeah, and of course, they've got huge resources as well, and with Apple, typically with their focus on UX, it's going to be slick straight out of the box probably as well. So. It's definitely exciting times, and I think they could do a lot to, as long as it's done in the right way, to gain mass adoption. I actually noticed like our Francisco, who kind of helped kind of with some of the research here, Sarah, he noted that you'd written kind of verifiable credentials are a key component of the future of digital ID. And I was going to ask you, why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's a standard that just makes sense. I am not a cryptography expert by any stretch of the imagination, but just sort of the, design, the ratification by the W3C, the vision of how they offer, this kind of secure interaction between an issuer, an individual, and a verifier. It's just a key component to this type of platform of the future. So, that's pretty much why.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And we spoke as well at the start, Sarah, about you having a couple of hats on. I guess you've obviously got your own belief in your own outlook and things, and it's really refreshing that you're keen to share that as well. You've spoken a lot about kind of Mastercard's approach. But from a personal level, what do you envision for like the state of digital identity? Where do you think we'll be in 10 years' time? What would you want to see?
I guess I want to see more of what the industry is coming together to implement. I really do believe that we need a change in approach away from centralized authorities back to individuals. And, I think that, AI and other things that are accelerating the pace of innovation, they're all showing that there are just gaps that need to be filled. I think social media, huge spotlight on, it's been a great equalizer, right, with respect to being able to get your story out. But it's also been something that's, got the potential to create a lot of damage to society due to kind of unverified people spreading information and content that shouldn't be accessed. So there's all sorts of things with that need to be cleaned up. And AI, Italy kind of banning Chat GPT. Part of that is really, who's accessing kind of what information, and, there are pieces of that are related to digital identity. So, I do believe we're at kind of a point where there's an inflection point where there's just too much to ignore the fact that this needs to be cleaned up and it needs to be done urgently. So, I don't know if I have some grand different vision of the future, but I do believe that this concept of injecting an individually owned digital ID into, social media, into Web3 as it emerges, into how we interact with AI and how information gets spread and accessed. I want to see a lot more happen with that, and I believe that it will.
Yeah. And I think with AI, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure have seen the images. I think there was Donald Trump was one, and Boris Johnson was another, where they used, I don't know what type of AI that they used, but they were converting obviously into images. And, it always strikes me that like that would be a situation where, like, we talk about credentials and how you could actually use credentials to prove who made a claim or an attestation about something. And I'm thinking actually you can start to potentially use that verifiable credentials as an antidote to deep fakes and AI generated imagery that is for now probably fairly easy to detect, but who knows who will be in a couple of years' time. Like, so how are we going to understand like what news sources to trust? They would need to actually start signing something to say, look, we produced this, or our staff produced this, and then you can read that and then verify that that was the case, and then decide whether you want to trust it or not.
Yes, I agree. I think that that's, needed. I mean, then the other question is, of course, will people kind of care if it comes from a verified source or not, and how will all of that kind of connect? But yeah, I mean, that I think that we just need to continue to accelerate efforts, because if you think about it, it's scary, the advances in being able to create deep fakes and other things, and how that type of stuff can be weaponized, not to get all dark and kind of weird on you. But, I think about that. And I mean, I personally find it exciting and just really important to play a role in solving for that. So, I mean, sometimes it can feel frustrating that things aren't moving quickly enough, but in this space, things have moved pretty quickly. Even in the last 5 years, it's been incredible. So I believe that we will start to solve for that. And that's, I'm happy to be playing a role in it. Yeah,
no, you certainly are. So that's been a really, really interesting chat. I really do appreciate you coming on. We covered a lot of ground. We've got a lot of kind of what Mastercard are doing, which is really kind of seem to be innovators in the space. And it was nice towards the end to get your own take on things. And hopefully for the listeners, we didn't get too dark and weird for them either. But I really appreciate you coming on. It's been really nice talking to you. Yeah, you too. I mean, if you can't tell, I could talk for quite a long time on these topics. There's just so much there. But I enjoyed it as well. And thank you for having me. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Sarah.